what's going on? It's Preacher! And the Legendary Rings, apparent final version, or soon-to-be tested version, I guess. The current iteration would be the probably most accurate way of describing it. Has been announced today after the immense fallout of the original incarnation, the old design. How old it was, I don't know. I think something we can all agree on, whether you like it or not, is that the legendary items in WoW, since MOP probably, have just become a hindrance rather than something cool. Which is, I think, is the saddest thing we need to consider, is legendary items are just more of a burden now, even for Blizzard. And we have to take into account here that Blizzard's still kind of working on what they do, which is really worrying, is that we're getting to the point where they're almost released. You've had everybody in the game working towards them, essentially, unless you somehow went out on a limb not to get it, on your main character at least, and they still weren't really sure what the fuck this thing was going to do. We're going to have a legendary ring next expansion. It was already announced, and they just didn't know what it was going to do. It's like, yeah, everybody needs a legendary. We gave everybody capes, and now we need to do this. We don't know what it's going to do, but we'll sort of work it out and muddle through as we get closer to the time. And that's led to my primary concern we'll get to later. Now, the initial reaction and sort of feedback they're getting is sort of understandable, but not really relevant in my opinion. Such things as, it'll screw people with 3-minute cooldowns. Nah, not really. From a raider's perspective, it's not a big deal. I don't think it is a big deal. Already we're lining up cooldowns for specific portions of fights. That's just the way it works in Warlords of Draenor. It's not a case of pop everything the second you have. Some fights work like that, namely those are the boring ones like Gruul. But for everything else, there are specific times and phases where cooldowns are required, and so you hold them back. You delay them already for these appropriate times until you massively outgear it, in which case it doesn't really matter. So the 2-minute, 3-minute, while some people will definitely be screwed due to fight length, which is a variable we just cannot control, it's not that big of a deal. It really isn't. This will just be treated as another raid cooldown. The other issues, of course, every derper who gets one, who will just macro it into their DPS cooldowns and be popping it at random and annoy the hell out of everybody else. That's really more of an LFR-ish problem and not a major concern, honestly. We're talking about a dungeon where, even after years, people seem to think the best time to Bloodlust is about 30 seconds after the pull. I don't know what goes on there, and there's not much I can do about it. So, from those guys, yeah, I see why you'd be pissed off, because people are just popping rings left and right. You'll probably get healing rings popped just before the boss and all this kind of stuff, but that's probably why it has such a short cooldown of 2 minutes. So you'll definitely be able to use it a couple of times per boss, at least once, right? So, those concerns I think are valid, but not affecting the major use of this, which is just this extra raid cooldown. What are my concerns then? What's my initial thought on this? Firstly, it's fucking boring. It's boring as shit. Holy God, is this boring? I read it and I was like, great. It's like another Bloodlust. And Bloodlust isn't that amazing anymore. It was when it came to the game. It was like, holy shit, Bloodlust, baby. This is immense. Look at the raid going bananas. But now Bloodlust is exactly what it's supposed to be. It's just a tool that we use whenever it's appropriate to get through the fight. And that's it. I mean, raiders don't really look at their numbers anymore. I'm seeing this more and more and more, is raiders don't like to see what their individual stuff hits for. It doesn't matter, really. It's about the raid output in all occasions, and if you're top of the DPS meter at the end, good for you. Let's, check your logs, but you're becoming less and less relevant by the day. But other than that, Bloodlust is just a tool. It's like Aspects of the Fox. If you don't get it, you're annoyed. And that's about it. So, obviously, Aspects of the Fox soon to be RIP. But this is so boring. What I really question is if this is like a cop-out idea. What seems to be going on with the legendary items this expansion is that they really, really desperately wanted some sort of group effect. Now, call me cynical, but that strikes me as the graphical portion of what these rings were to do was decided way, way earlier. Whatever these rings were going to do was going to combine the group in some manner that would have a really intense graphical effect. We saw in the past, in MOP with the cloaks, that an intense graphical effect was included with the cloaks. And I've no doubt that the idea of making it a group thing, which seems to be the theme, because looking at both iterations we've seen, is that there's some graphical portion of this which affects the whole group and will be very cool. And no doubt be very cool. And that's alright. The problem is, what is the bonus? 25% extra damage. This is Blizzard said when we came into WoD that they're getting rid of all stuff that was a flat damage percentage buff because it's boring. It's boring as shit. It is. It's absolutely boring. Flat damage increases are boring. They don't do anything interesting to your character. Just the stuff you're doing already hits harder. Okay. But nothing affects my gameplay, nothing cool happens, nothing interesting, nothing a little bit out of the ordinary. Even the flurry of Zuen, when it procced off, looked very, very fucking cool. I mean, this Tiger Claws were shredding everything in front of me. That was kind of cool. Extra damage, it was all nice, and it was a bit cool, and a very good damage increase. But a flat damage increase? Okay, doesn't do anything different, really. It will just be dictated by the raid leader. Which I get why people are pissed. Is like, you have this item, this legendary item, legendary, let's not forget that you've worked towards in a really menial manner of collecting fucking bits of rock, and it's completely out of your control. Most raiders will not have a binding or a macro that involves the ring in any way. The only person who will have that is the ring activators. Because you don't want to risk using it at the wrong time. Why would you? You don't want that to be a thing. Absolutely not. It's just like, most people don't use Bloodlust. You have a Bloodluster. He's your Bloodlust guy, and he does it. Because he will decide when best to do it. So, other than that, the Bloodlust guy, and well, whoever that is right now, will just be in control of everybody's rings. At least from a DPS perspective. And other than that, it's completely out of your control. It's literally nothing to do with you. And I think that's really sad. This ring has absolutely nothing to do with you personally from a raiding standpoint. It's completely just an extra raid cooldown. And what's worse, I think what we really have to consider here is that because it's just a flat damage buff that you can gain every 2 minutes, I think some people are under the impression that, oh shit, we're going to kick the fuck out of various bosses. No. Because Blizzard's just going to balance it out. And how are they going to balance out the fact that you have an extra huge damage increase? They're just going to give stuff more health. Right? I mean, that's all that's going to happen here. And therefore, in the grand scheme of things, it will have no effect at all on the actual content. Other than old content. You'll be able to go back to old content and do like Butcher Mythic in some ridiculous time now. But other than that, the new content, the Hellfire Citadel, all that kind of stuff, not really. Because you're now going to be totally balanced around the idea that your whole raid will have this 25% damage increase whenever they need it. So when you look at fights like, if we were to look into the Blackrock Foundry, and we look at things like the Iron Maiden's Mythic, where you're up on the boat and you've got to kill the dude in a certain amount of time or your whole raid will die, all this kind of stuff, that will just have more health now because it's likely, because that's a burst phase, that is when people will use the rings. Blizzard will know this and they'll say, what's the average DPS needed to kill this guy? Okay, it's blah blah blah. So we'll now just do blah 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 plus 25%. Which makes it even more boring, right? Because it doesn't have an effect. And that's what really sort of saddens me about the whole thing, is it's a flat extra raid cooldown that can be easily countered by Blizz in game design. And more than likely, you're likely to have phases in fights that are designed that this is a point where you would use the ring. Oh, we seem to be about 25% DPS behind this. This is a ring moment, okay. And that's what it will be, ultimately. Exceedingly dull. Required, which, you know, is a thing as well. It's going to be required. Why would you not carry a raider that can do 25% extra damage every 2 minutes? Why would you do that? You wouldn't, right? From a raid perspective? But ultimately, that's not a big deal. They're going to give some sort of catch-up mechanic so most people can get the legendary ring and be all part of the same little team. There will be, of course, people who've got a fresh alt and have jumped into raiding and will be missing out on this immense buff, because it is a huge buff, and we'll have to wait and deal with that situation. But they will more than likely be in the minority. If you're not on your way to getting your legendary ring by now, then yeah, you're probably in the minority, and that's no big deal. But it is required. It's not interesting. It's not even likely to be in your control. It's just a thing that exists in the game now. And it is what it is. And my saddest thought is that it'll be balanced around it, so it will make no difference to how encounters work. And that's about it. It's excessively dull. The whole thing about the stacking of cooldowns and 3 minutes and 2 minutes, yeah, it's a kind of thing, but not really, in my opinion. It's not something to worry about. What we might see is perhaps, depending on gear scaling. I mean, looking at the patch notes, it kind of makes sense now that some of the classes that have access to 2-minute cooldowns, why they maybe have got some nerfs, because they're obviously going to be able to use their 2-minute cooldowns every single time the ring's up. So they basically have to account that those cooldowns are now 25% more powerful all the time. They have to balance around that idea. So we saw some nerfs to classes that we weren't really sure about. Maybe that's why that's going on. I will point out here, though, that also some of the new set bonuses actually screw you over. I was looking at some of like the Rep Paladin ones that change your Avenging Wrath cooldown. That's actually now a burden. If you think about it, that's actually like not cool at all. So I don't want that anymore. And these kind of things really start to add up overall as some people are getting a little bit pissed off with what looks like it's going to be a good thing. And then you introduce this overall generalized thing that is on a very regular cooldown that no longer really counts and is actually a bit of a burden. So it's a mixed bag of things. It seems very rushed, honestly. It seems like we need to get something out here. Let's choose something like a flat damage buff because, you know, people like that, I guess. If nobody's going to complain. But yeah, nobody's going to complain because it's not interesting. It really isn't. Also, a big shout, I suppose it's got to go to, I would like to mention this because I know the healers are out there, is that there are many healers who don't want to use their healing specific ring. There are. They use the DPS ring for whatever reason, and tanks doing the same because they just don't need those extra stats yet. How that will affect on progress will probably change, but because your ring is tied to the other healers, and so on and so forth, you know, you're kind of linked, inexorably linked to them now. You can't really change that. And therefore you lose choice with your character as well, which is kind of sad. I mean, from a DPS perspective, that's not a big deal. But there are several healers and several tanks out there that just prefer the stats that come from the DPS ring, for example, and therefore don't want to use their role-specific ring. They want to use a different one. And now no longer will probably have that choice. Because are you really going to give up a huge raid cooldown? No, not really. That choice has now been taken out of your hands by Blizzard. Blizzard said, no, we'll control this, really. And that's, again, it's just a bit of a bummer on what should be quite cool. Was I expecting much, I think is the question. No, I wasn't. I wasn't expecting much. Was I expecting what is a glorified version of the old MOP meta gem? Not really. I mean, it's a little bit on the bummer side. Some people are complaining about the range idea, but there seems to be speculation that the AoE comes from the person who activated it. Now, the wording doesn't suggest that to me. It says here, each empowered player unleashes a blast of light that strikes all enemies within 20 yards. Now, I can understand as a range, that kind of sucks. That kind of sucks, because it does say that each empowered player will unleash a blast, which means everybody who is under the effect of the ring will unleash this blast. And if 20 yards, there are not a lot of range within 20 yards. So it's completely understandable why the range is saying hopefully that can get changed and be, you know, we need some alteration there to not make every ranged person run into 20 yards, because that can be a big disaster. If you think about Operator Mythic, you don't want grenades anywhere near the melee. And it's a big part of the mechanics. It's a big part of the encounters that ranged have to learn to stay the fuck away from the melee camp. So this kind of ring really counters that style of mechanic, you know, and people will be looking to be within 20 yards every 2 minutes. And whether or not that's feasible on the encounter-by-encounter basis, or are you asking those guys to not do damage? Yeah, probably not. Probably not. That's another issue that may come up here, but these are all things that can be changed by numbers, so it doesn't matter that much. It's a little bit of an issue that can be changed quite easily. Overall, I wasn't expecting much. I wasn't expecting this, but I'm not overly surprised that it's quite boring. I said it's boring, but I'm not surprised it's boring. I'm not surprised, because you're giving it to everybody. Can you have everybody with the power of a Shadowmourne? No. Can you have everybody with the power of a Valnir? No. Can you give everybody Warglaives? No. Thunder Fury procs? No. You can't give that to absolutely everybody, because that would be stupid. Simply put, it'd be stupid, because those individual procs were in fact, dare I say it, legendary. Is 25% damage dealt increase legendary? In strength, yeah. In its actual power and potency, yes it is. It absolutely is. Is it interesting? No. No, it's not. Is it as cool as Thunder Fury lightning shooting off across everybody, or random electrified shields popping up on everybody in the middle of a raid, just signifying that somebody in our raid is a legendary weapon wielder? No, it's not. But I'm kind of okay with it. I wasn't okay with the previous iteration at all. This one, fine. I could deal with it because, frankly, it has little to no effect. Ultimately, it'll just be something that's decided by a raid leader. It'll be pre-planned and coordinated, no different than Bloodlust. And ultimately, fine, whatever. It's just going to be there. I won't care. I will no doubt not be the guy who activates it in our raid. And therefore, I couldn't give two shits about it, honestly. I couldn't give two shits. Alright, guys. Thank you so much for listening. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Were you outraged? If you're an LFR player, does it actually bother you that much? I don't know. Let me know. Alright, guys. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.